When it comes to Wild Era games, one of the most controversial aspects is definitely the dungeons. Oh sure, there are some great ones, like Hyrule Castle in the first game, or the Lightning Temple in Tears of the Kingdom, but the overall quality is far lower than in previous Zelda titles, with many fans arguing that the Divine Beasts and Temples are some of the worst dungeons around. Yet, that made me wonder something. How good are they really? What dungeons are best and worst in the Wild Era games? Let's rank them and find out. Starting with the worst dungeon in either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah, we're not going to mince words here. This dungeon is just plain bad. There's basically no exploration, since all the puzzles are in the open in places that are incredibly easy to reach. The combat is meaningless, since you get so much room to manoeuvre you'll never get hit. The themes are barely explored, since this water dungeon has barely any water in it, and the boss is a complete nightmare that's more of a chore to fight than anything else. It's a bad attempt at a dungeon that fails to justify an equally bad sage ability, and one of the few F-rank dungeons in the series. Still, on to next choice, also from Tears of the Kingdom, that being Hyrule Castle from said game. Atmosphere wise, this place feels like it should be amazing. I mean, it's an almost floating castle in the centre of Hyrule Field, held up by a pillar of gloom and visible for the whole game. The place just screams climactic final showdown, and you play the whole game waiting for that to be the case. Then you get into the dungeon, and you find the dungeon has barely anything to it. The guardians from the last game are gone, and so is basically every other enemy from the last game. You get a few scattered pockets of resistance, and that's about it. Add this to the quest being a series of battles strung by a chase quest, and a complete lack of anything to do here, and it's a disappointment at best. Ah well, the atmosphere and layout of the area is still good, and the boss fight is fun, so it's at least more interesting than the water temple was. On to another place from Tears of the Kingdom now, and well, we're not sure if this counts as a dungeon. But because the final boss is there, we decide to count it. It's fine I guess. On a surface level, Gloom's origin does do a lot right. The atmosphere is spooky enough, especially the music and vocals at the end. The final boss is incredible, and one of the best in the whole franchise, and there is a decent amount of challenge here and there, with some tough enemies and obstacles. That said, it all feels rather lacking for a final area. For a place codenamed Gandalf Castle, it feels less like a castle and more like a glorified cave system. It also feels less threatening than it should too, since unlike Breath of the Wild, where guardians are everywhere and dodging their shots was difficult, this area uses weak enemies in small groups that you can easily blast past. As a result, if Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle felt like Ganon's Tower in A Link to the Past, this one feels like Ganon's Tower in The Wind Waker. A cool idea and look, but also a place with nothing too exciting to actually do there. Look, we're going to be honest here, none of these dungeons really stood out enough to justify their own entry, since the whole Divine Beast concept was so repetitive and overdone they all felt like parts of the same dungeon. Regardless, there are some positives here. The concepts are neat, given these dungeons do fit nicely into giant robots. The idea of a moving part of the dungeon, solve puzzles was neat, even if the actual puzzles weren't anything to write home about. The music was top notch too, with even a hidden SOS message in the background. Unfortunately, that's where the positives end. As we said before, the puzzles have nothing to them, and the combat isn't much to write home about either, with only Guardian Scales and Malice Skulls lurking the halls. The Blights were a cool idea the first time, but they're so easy and samey, you'll just blast them to pieces in seconds. And well, the whole dungeon part of the ordeal is just non-existent. You don't explore, you don't fight much, you barely solve puzzles, or the terribly bland intro to dungeon design in the Wild Era. Either way, on to some more interesting places now, like Tears of the Kingdom's Fire Temple. As far as vibes go, this one is incredible. It's an ancient Goron city deep in the depths of Death Mountain, and the atmosphere is right on point for that. There are minecarts to ride around, switches to change where they go, and a feeling on an archaeological expedition to a town from the era of the Zonai. Plus, the boss fits the area perfectly. It's a fun Goma fight, makes good use of Nobu's ability, and it's arguably one of the best Goma fights in the series. Unfortunately, the dungeon's presence in Tears of the Kingdom is arguably its weakness here. because both the tools you're given and the structure dungeons have removes a lot of the potential. With the former, mainly too easy to break the game. I mean, why even use a minecart when a flying machine, rocket shield, ascend or climbing will do a better job? There's no reason to, unless you want to deliberately hinder yourself for a challenge, and it means most of the dungeon gets ignored by players as a result. Similarly, with the whole terminal structure returning from Breath of the Wild, there's not a lot of incentive to explore either. You know where your targets are, and you know there's nothing stopping you from activating them beyond a trivial roadblock. So, while the feel of being a city is cool, mechanics wise, it's just a glorified divine beast. Next. Or at least, next if you count this as a dungeon, this is rather tricky, so what even counts here? Is it the Spirit Temple itself, which acts as a glorified boss arena? Is it the construct factory, despite the boss not being there? Is it the whole ordeal, from the Thunderhead Isles onwards? Ah well, let's count the stuff in the depths. In that case, the contract factory is a pretty neat idea for a dungeon. Instead of activating terminals or reaching the end, you're collecting parts of a giant robot the minute you use their body. These parts are found in storehouses throughout the area, with a few simple puzzles here and there related to a certain Zonai device as the main theme. It's a creative concept and one that fits well with the vibe of the area. You do feel like you're building a Zonai device here, and you test some mechanics you've used for the whole game. The boss fight is a blast too. You fight the Seas construct in what's effectively a mech boxing match, and it's a great use of Minu's abilities, unmatched by Rest Adventure, even if I wish it was practical to fight on foot too. What's a bit less impressive though, is the whole feeling that both the construct factory and Spirit Temple lacked a few things structurally. So, unlike some of the other dungeons, there's not really much point in exploring here. With the exception of a few pose, there's nothing to get if you climb them or explore their outskirts. There's also Minu's lack of effectiveness elsewhere too. Her mech form was great for this dungeon and the boss fight, which is certainly cool, but it's not that practical in combat or for exploration, especially later in the game. Either way, the dungeon itself is still decent enough, so let's move on. To probably the highest ranked divine beast in the original Breath of the Wild, Vah Naboris is the nearest thing to this concept done right, and well, there are some reasons for that. Most notably, the layout of Divine Beast makes it feel more like a dungeon, since well, it's not just one huge room with a few tiny offshoots here and there. It's a multi-level building with a variety of separate areas and puzzles and the odd bit of combat sprinkled in. When combined with the hump rotation thing and the electricity puzzles, it's more a creative experience than its three earlier counterparts. It's also carried a lot by the boss too. Yeah, Thunderblight Ganon can be tricky. Yes, some people get annoyed by the battle. But overall, it's a good boss fight, and probably one of the only bosses in Breath of the Wild that actually puts your parrying and flurry rush skills to good use, and the kind of battle we wish was more common elsewhere. So, the dungeon and boss are on the better side, putting them high on this list. However, there are still a few things holding it back. Most notably, it's obviously the Divine Beast visual style and atmosphere. No matter how good the dungeon is, the samey visuals and theming just hindered the experience. Making everything so Sheikah themed was the worst decision Nintendo made for Breath of the Wild, and Naboris doesn't avoid that. Secondly, while the combat and puzzles are better, they're still a long way from being good. They serve sport best, and with the exception of Thunderblight Battle, mostly just stand out for being in Breath of the Wild. Still, time for the next one. That being the DLC dungeon in Breath of the Wild's Champion's Ballad. And to be honest, I've got a lot of mixed thoughts here. On the one hand, it's probably the best Divine Beast the game has to offer. The 4 chambers are all of interesting puzzles, the boss is a work of art, puts Calamity Ganon to shame, and the fact you revisit the area makes it a lot less one note than the main dungeons before it. On a technical and design level, it's the best normal dungeon in the game. At the same time though, can't help but feel a bit disappointed here. A bit disappointed that even in the DLC, the dungeon they made was a Sheikah style giant mech with the same style as every other shrine and dungeon in the game. It felt like the design team doubling down on their vision for the game and ignoring any and all feedback in favour of continuing to do what fans didn't care for. In a sense, that's how we notice about Nintendo DLC in general. Namely, Nintendo never likes to fix a game in DLC. Instead, they just do more of the same and keep real changes to a bare minimum. It's like their philosophy is that DLC is people that love the game and everything in it and want more of the same no matter what. Ah well, it's still a good dungeon, we just wish you'd taken a few more risks and varied up the formula a bit to make things more interesting. which is at least something Tears of Kingdom's dungeons did well. They took the general structure of Divine Beast, but added unique themes and bosses to make things more interesting. And the Wind Temple, the first time in the game you experience that. In fact, the whole dungeon is kind of carried by the atmosphere. Seriously, the idea of a giant flying ship in the middle of a tornado is so goddamn awesome, it sounds out from the get-go. The dungeon itself keeps that theme present from start to finish. You got corridors to explore below deck, cannons to avoid on the deck and sides, a fall for a laser grid to off basically a cargo hold, and all sorts of other neat ideas to make you think, yeah, that's a ship alright. Add this to incredible music, and one of the best first boss in the game, and well, it's a strong start to main adventure. You really do feel like unearthing an ancient civilization here, and it fits the theme of the story perfectly. Plus, you get Tulin's ability afterwards, aka the only real sage ability that's even remotely useful outside the dungeon. So, there's a lot to like here. It's a visually stunning area with a strong soundtrack, boss and main ability, and one that shows how different Tears of Kingdom can be from its predecessor. That said, it's not perfect by any means. The ship aesthetic is cool, but the puzzles don't really involve it much. You're doing stuff inside the ship, but the things you do don't usually involve the ship. The puzzles aren't particularly complicated or interesting either. They're decent enough for what they do, but they're hardly on the same level as anything found in an older Zelda game. Just a basic exercise, you think what's around you, then put it to good use in the most obvious way possible. Regardless, they don't hold the dungeon back, so it earns its place as the third on our list. On to the next one now, that being Hyrule Castle from Breath of the Wild. In many ways, this was the antithesis of everything you'd expect a Zelda dungeon to be. There are virtually no puzzles, with only things resembling such being trivial exercises used to enter secret rooms or make treasure chests appear. Your abilities aren't required, with it being possible for each end on foot without any climbing, gliding or Sheikah stuff. And well, there's no structure to the place in general. It's all exploration and combat in a dangerous environment as a build up to final boss. But here's the thing, I'd also say that's what makes it fit Breath of the Wild so well, while Hyrule Castle might be the type of dungeon these games need to have, since well, it's basically a microcosm of Breath of the Wild in general. It's a place you can spend minutes or hours, but the challenge comes from navigating the area and fighting enemies, and where your abilities can all be put to good use. In other words, it's basically a great plateau as an endgame. It's the essence of Breath of the Wild in dungeon form, and that's what makes it work so well. It's a dungeon formula adapted to a much more survival focused game, rather than shoehorned in puzzle box like Divine Beasts were. That said, it's all got its flaws, most notable being it doesn't really add enough to make the area feel threatening. Don't get me wrong, the Guardians are cool, the Lionels are cool, the use of Stalnox as a mini boss, that's cool, but having mostly the Zalfos and Moblins as your main enemies is certainly an interesting choice. They're not tough to fight and make spawning inside a castle a lot less scary than it could have been. Every time I get here, I know that the second I enter the castle I'm safe. The danger level just evaporates when indoors. So it would have been better if Dark Nuts, Iron Knuckles or other unique enemies were a thing here. That would have worked better than yeah, another Lizalfos, yay. Then there's the final boss. On paper it's a cool concept, and design wise quite neat, but Calamity Ganon just doesn't put up another fight, especially when the next phase is completely trivial. If this dungeon had a Tears of Kingdom style final boss, it would have been my top choice. Regardless, it's a good time and one of the better dungeons in these games. Which brings us to our top choice, and yeah, we all knew this was coming. The Lightning Temple is a definitive Tears of Kingdom dungeon and probably the closest series has come to recreating the feel of a classic dungeon in the modern era, with the whole vibe and atmosphere being just damn near perfect. Seriously, this is like an Indiana Jones movie. You're exploring a dark and dreary pyramid full of dangerous monsters and traps and trying your best to navigate a whole maze of complex puzzles and passageways. You've got sarcophagi with monsters inside, flaming boulders, walls sewn together, epic battles between constructs and Gibdos. It's not a few rooms held together, it's a complex and confusing death trap littered with remains of those that came before you. In many ways, it's just perfect. It's also the only dungeon in the game that somewhat dispenses with the terminal structure found in the other dungeons. Indeed, for the first whole half of the dungeon, you don't see a single terminal, it's just a winding set of passages and rooms that eventually leads to the main hub, like say, Zelda dungeons of old. And well, we greatly appreciate that. The whole find a terminal style level design is one of the most boring, uninspired choices the devs came up with, and and makes the areas they're in feel utterly predictable because of that. You know where they all are, you know there's barely any build up, you know the obstacles are trivial, and it feels even less interesting than the whole Demon King, Secret Stone thing that's gone viral on the internet. Older games had inspired dungeons and unique design concepts, while Wild Era dungeons feel like a formula the devs adhere to religiously. The Lightning Temple throws that aside for a while and is all the better because of it. It also avoids the other problems by making it difficult to just skip everything. You can use Ascend, but there's no open air structure where you figure out where to go or breeze. You have to actually navigate the dungeon here, and again, that makes things more interesting. And you've got a difficult, somewhat exciting boss battle at the end too. Queen Gibdo is our favourite boss in the game, which is certainly a more interesting one than most bosses fought in these games, and the pre-dungeon battle just makes the final encounter feel all the more earned. All in all, it's a great dungeon that mixes the best elements of both old and new Zelda games, and by far the standout moment in the Wild Era. So yeah, that's our ranking for the dungeons in the Wild Era games. It's not too crazy all things considered, since well, you all know what the better dungeons would be, as well as what the worst ones would be. But we hope you found it interesting nonetheless. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel if you want to see more, then leave your thoughts in the comments below or over on the Discord server today.